Hello students, we're going to continue our little experiment here with narrated slideshows. Going on to our third lecture on ancient Greece. Again, this will be divided up into two sections. So let's go ahead and get started on section one, shall we? All right, a little bit of historical social context. Excuse me, ancient Greece is the cradle of Western civilization, divided into three categories. The archaic or Homeric, which is the age of Ulysses, of Troy, of Achilles, and so forth. Age of Heroes, the classical or golden age, that's when most theater takes place. And then the Hellenic age, which is the age of Alexander the Great. Basically, it's a group of city-states that thrived, creating the philosophies and ideals that are the basis of our civilization. And of course, the Hellenic age is conquest by Alexander the Great. Greeks were master traders, interacted with several other cultures throughout the Mediterranean region and the Far East, influenced a lot of cultures, and were influenced by them in turn. Now, we can say that ancient Greece ended with the death of Alexander. He didn't leave a successor. His empire was broken up into these little kingdoms, and eventually they were gobbled up by the Roman Empire. But their society, their culture is the basis for sort of Western democracy today. Very open and fluid social fabric, not a rigid hierarchy, which we saw with the Egyptians. Principles of republicanism, democracy, not hereditary rule, but not ordained by the gods as well. So you can rise in power and in importance. Solid middle and upper class of tradesmen and craftsmen. We do have foreign slaves who are bought or captured in military endeavors. But they are treated well and usually last a period of years and then are freed. Same for indentured servants. An indentured servant, of course, someone who will proffer their services for a number of years and then will be released after that period. Okay, I don't know if I explained that very well, but there it is. Government was done, again, adult males, but women did run the households. They were not allowed to speak in public or attend social events except for the theater, where they were able to sit in segregated sections. Had to have a supporter, father, husband, nearest male relative, except for prostitutes. Now, prostitutes are different. Usually they are foreign people, possibly indentured servants. They are educated. They are allowed to speak freely on a variety of topics. They were well respected. The idea of just sort of not so much prostitute so much as an escort service. So, and of course, Sparta, where women were considered equal to the men and spoke openly in public debates. So that is an interesting kind of exception. Nudity in Greece, not taboo, but really frowned upon in public, particularly females. It is acceptable in some areas, particularly athletes. Olympic athletes were often nude, as you can see by this sculpture here. Nude females, not appropriate until the Hellenic age. All right, a little bit about the types of fabric. Wool was favored. Linen was introduced from Egypt. Those were the two biggies. They liked a particular type of pleating, which you can see in this skirt on the right, which is called broomstick pleating, which is basically you get the fabric wet, you twist it on a sort of broom handle at both ends, maybe add some starch, let it dry, and then you come up with this when you untie it. Alexander bought cotton from the region, but it couldn't, or from the Far East, but it couldn't be grown in Greece, so it didn't really take. We did have silk from China. Artisans would take silk garments, carefully unravel the fabric, and reweave it with linen to make it last longer. So usually off-white colors. Over time, a technique for bleaching was learned, where the fabric was exposed to sulfur fumes because white was the desired color, particularly for government officials. We do have some natural dyes to create saturated colors. We do get more of what's known as color fastness, which I'll talk about in later lectures. Bands of vivid colors were used to identify occupation or rank. Spinning and weaving, done at home by the women of the house. That was a particular skill as far as women go to show their usefulness as a wife, as a mother, as the head of household, is how good were they weave. And they all wove. From a queen of a city-state, To the wife, an important official. They needed to know how to weave. Very respectable for all classes. So very adroit weavers. And you can see here on the right, a loom of the time is a vertical loom, as you can see, warp and weft threads, fairly sheer. Until we get to modern industrial techniques, you're going to see some variations in fabric because everybody's weaving by hand. That's just natural. We don't have tailors, so with rare exceptions, all fabric was draped. It was basically woven to the desired size and never cut. We do have some sewing, but again, most of what people are wearing is not tailored and is draped. You may know this in the Odyssey, right? Queen Penelope. There, she is the wife of, what's his name? Ulysses, Odysseus, and it takes him 10 years to get home from the Trojan War because he angered Neptune, I believe, or Poseidon. I think it was Poseidon. So he put all these obstacles in the way, and of course, Queen Penelope is waiting at home. She's weaving, I think, her father's burial shroud by day. And all the suitors come up saying, Odysseus is dead. You have to marry. You have to marry. You have to marry one of us. It's the law. She says, okay, but I'm not going to marry you until I've finished my father's burial shroud. So she would weave by day and unravel by night. It never caught on the suitors that it took 10 years to do the burial shroud, but, you know, willing suspension of disbelief. So no form in itself in the clothing. Fashions came in drapings, types of drapings. Very little distinction between the sexes when it came to creating fabrics. We do have some sleeve garments adapted from the Persians. And of some kind of trousers, but they were rarely worn. They were considered barbarian and really only used for underwear. So let's look at the women's clothing first. Very, very simple. The first common garment was the Doric peplos, which is basically a large rectangle of fabric, usually wool, folded across the top, then folded down one side and pinned at the shoulders. You cannot get much simpler than that. Sometimes it was girdled just under the fold. Let me get my little red pin here. Just under this fold, you might have a girdle. And sometimes these ends down here, see what I'm circling, lower right, might be weighted. But you can see it's very simple. Fold it, double it up, pin it, boom, out the door for a lovely day at the Acropolis. Pins used to clamp these chitons together are called fibula, singular fibula, fibulae, I should say. Edge usually has a colored, the edge usually had a colored embroidered border that was attached to the peplos by a type of sewing called faggoting, where two edges are sewn together. I'm talking about the edge of the chiton, obviously, and not the, the peplos, and not the fibula. Don't want to mix things up here. It's a little trickier when you're recording it and not doing it live. Anyway, faggoting is this, putting these two together. Up here, these are fibulae. You can see quite elaborate and really large. There's another legend about a messenger returning to Athens to deliver a message that the Athenian army was wiped out during a defeat in the Peloponnesian War. And the war widows, the new war widows, were so outraged and so grief-stricken that they grasped their fibula and stabbed the man to death. That's where we get don't kill the messenger. So after that, we reduced the size of the fibula greatly, but you can see the decorative objects there. Okay, let's move on. Here we go. I mentioned, I misspoke a moment ago and said chiton. This is the chiton. The first one was the peplos. The Ionic chiton, a later one, is bigger and a little more elaborate, but it's still basically just a large square of fabric. You fold it on one side, you pin it at intervals to make kind of a sleeve, you see, there, and then you girdle it at the waist, so you get a sleeved sort of garment. But it's a big piece of fabric there. It's as large as 9 feet square, so that's not a tiny little bit of fabric. Linen is probably best for this because the wool is going to be very heavy. So here we see other girdles. If you have two girdles, as you can see, two or more, it's carefully bloused and draped. This is the colpos, the region in between the two girdles. So that was a popular fashion. Here we go. This is over here. This is the Hellenic style, which is girdling the garment just under the bosom or diagonally across the bosom. This will become denoted as Empire style later on. But both of these can be considered Hellenic style. This one over here, this one is more characteristic and definitive of that style, I would say. Okay, sometimes you wear over the peplos or the chiton a little kind of rectangular, I won't say shawl, a little jacket maybe on one shoulder called the chlamydon. Very simple, draped and pinned over one shoulder. Embroidered and edged with a band of color, usually made of linen. You can see over here on the left that it's pleated on this statuary. On the right is a prostitute who's wearing a sheer linen peplos with bare breast, which is not uncommon. And you could, there you go. We do have underwear, as you can see, loincloths called a wool loincloth, a thong called the perizoma. You can see kind of a picture here you see on the left. It's just a band of fabric. Over here, this is a top to a makeup jar. It's a little more definitive, a little easier to see. It's basically, like I said, just a thong. So that was your underwear. What are the men doing, you're wondering? Well, basically, here we have a male version of the chiton. Or basically a male version of the peplos, but I guess in modern vocabulary, we refer to it the male chiton. Shorter. These are shorter. Women's went to the ankles. Men stopped just above the knees. Belted once at the waist. Generally made of wool, also of linen. For lower class men or working class men, you want to keep a shoulder free, so it's usually fashioned at one shoulder. This is known as the exomus. Here's a male version of the chlamydon, called the chlamys. I'm not too particular. Chlamydon, kind of interchangeable. It is a traveling cloak, rectangular, made of wool, fastened on one shoulder with a fibula. Usually had a band of color, not always. And like I said, this is a traveling garment, as you see. In case you're wondering, this is how you drape it. Study it up. It looks pretty hard. Okay, let's move on. The most representative garment for ancient Greek men, what you're going to see on the statues, and whenever there's usually a movie or about a philosopher or something, you're going to see the himation, which is kind of the Greek version of the toga. Finely woven square of wool measuring 6 feet by 9 feet. It's just a big square. You drape it over one shoulder, you wrap it around the torso, and you tuck it down on yourself. You can see on this one is wrap, around, twist and tuck. There you go. Usually leave one arm free. Now, a lot of times, this is unusual for us. When you wear a himation, you don't wear anything else. Maybe your underwear, maybe your perizoma, if you got, men's version. But you're going to usually wear just this, which would seem odd to us to go out for formal occasions in a bed sheet, but perfectly normal. Formal occasion is sort of the tuxedo of the Greek world. Teaching, if we were in class, we would have to wear our himations. Sometimes, like I said, worn over chiton by itself. Faggoting used along here, you see, to decorate the edge. Very important. Now, there is sort of a version of the himation, which is basically just a large square of fabric that becomes sort of a drape. You always worn over a chiton or a peplos. You can see here on the left this sort of draped himation, and over here a diplax, which is basically like a little apron. So she has here. Oops, I was tear. Wait a second. Let me erase that. Good Lord. I am not making this. There we are. Okay, sorry about that. So this top part here you can see is a chiton. This is taken from a statue of Athena. A very elaborate chiton. And this whole bit of cloth is her diplax. So that's sort of an apron. Okay, let's move on. We're in pretty good shape here. We're going to do hairstyles and headdresses real quick, then we'll finish up part one. Um, Women tend to have long hair, carefully rolled or curled, tresses hanging down to the shoulders, so you can see here, or braided in a lot of instances. A lot of curling. We have this curling iron that they use called the calamistrum, which is, calamistrum I believe is Latin, but it did first appear in the Greek word, so we're just going to use the Latin because that is the most accepted. It was heated in ashes and applied to the hair. Here's some drawings of different calamistrums. You can see this has a little clamp, like you clamp the hair in and twist it around. You have this hollow reed there that sometimes you put a hot poker in, or a hot stick or a piece of lead, which will help heat it up. And then you twist it, and voila, like a curling iron, you have curls. Now, by the classical age, we start to see this long pleated hair, this long rolled hair, curled hair, what we might call a perm, being pulled up into a bun or knot at the back of the head. That became very fashionable, and that's what we see as a lot of classic Greek representation. Might have some curls or ringlets. You can see here, let's go to the upper right here, these little ringlets here, and curls to frame the face. There. This is a very popular style, I think, in the classical period. This is the melon coiffure, where you braid the hair, then you pull back and tightly wound it around the head to make this bun. Most hair colors, dark brunette or black. However, in the classical era, once the Greeks learned of the Germanic tribes and their women with these fair tresses, they'd begin dyeing their hair with saffron to get more of a blonde. It comes out as kind of a reddish blonde color, but to emulate the tresses of the Germanic women. Men, just to let you know, in the classical period, long curled beards. In the archaic period, I'm sorry, in the Homeric period. By the classical era, shorter, curled. Young men curled, shaven. Older men also curled and rolled, and beards that may be curled and close cropped. So up here you have long beards in the old days, shorter beards in the modern times. So, okay. Quickly, the headdresses we'll go over for women in the archaic era. Scarves, linen wrapped around the head. Very popular in the Homeric era is the Phrygian cap or Phrygian bonnet, which is sort of this weird soft wool cap that covered the entire head and kept the hairstyle intact in inclement weather with these little lappets down here you can see. Also, we get a number of headdresses that help support the bun. Two that we want to mention. One is very simple, a fillet, which is just a small metal band that circles the head. And then the splendome, which is this sort of scarf sling, kind of like a Victorian snood that will hold up and protect the bun and look stylish as well. Very characteristic of women is the Stephanie, a coronet with a stiff upward bending brim, here seen with a splendome, and this odd little straw hat called the tholia, which, yes, actually did sit on top of the head instead of surrounding the head as most straw hats would be. Men also would wear fillets. Two we should mention here, the pilos, this wool brimless cap, kind of like a wool hoodie, not a hoodie, those little knit caps, and then a straw hat for working outside, the petassos. So women, oops, I can't go back. Women have the tholia, men have the petassos. We are stopping here. We will start part 2 in a moment. Bye.